So you're here for a conference on exponential finance, and you've spent the entire day so far listening to all kinds of amazing things about medicine, and about robots, and about self-driving cars. And so finally, we're getting to finance. Because when we created the track in finance, economics, and entrepreneurship at Singularity U, the challenge was to say, OK, what is the effect that all of this exponentially advancing technology having on the world of business? Because ultimately, where the rubber meets the road is when it comes to business. Because all these wonderful developments have to be paid for. They're all being developed and inspired by the hope of a return, an economic return. They're being funded by the markets out there. So when we think about finance, what do we typically think about? Well, we usually think about the public stock markets, right? And so you have an entire industry devoted to the public markets. And there are today 5,000, plus or minus, publicly traded companies, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, all combined in the US. And we have this entire industry that's all around the world of finance. But what we don't think about, often in the context of the word finance, is that in addition to those 5,000 public companies, there are, 6 million private companies out there. And you are seeing over 2 million companies started every year. A lot of these are single-person companies, dog walkers and pool cleaners and stuff, but over 700,000 of them are incorporated employer businesses that are creating new jobs and working with new people. And something interesting has happened along the way. You have these 6 million private companies that are these new small companies, in many cases, creating new kinds of things. Meanwhile, the dinosaurs in the public markets, what's going on? Well, if you take a look at the Fortune 500 company, the Fortune 500 list, 443 of the companies on the list weren't there when the list first came out. And if you take a look, what you can see here is the accelerating pace of companies dropping off the list. As time goes forward, companies drop off faster and faster and faster. Because there is a very simple truth that if I can leave you with one thing to take away from this whole conference, it is that all the things you've heard today, all the things you'll hear tomorrow, all of the results of this exponentially advancing technology mean one thing. And that is that any company that was designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. Sounds like a pretty big statement, but think about it. With the possible exception of natural resource extraction kinds of companies, where their technology is advancing, making it easier to discover new sources of resources and stuff, virtually everything else, every other industry was based on a particular technology and state of facts that it existed at the time. And when that changes, an entire company that was set up to work in a particular context no longer works. And it's very, very hard for those companies to change. So, for example, think of all these companies that are big brand names that we've all heard of. You know what they all have in common? Bankrupt. Every single one of these companies went bankrupt. Now, for some, it was a question of a big company that overextended itself. In others, it was a case where the industry itself changed. Why is virtually every major American airline bankrupt? They had to go through it because they were designed for the 20th century. They were designed for a different economy. They were designed for different technology, whether it was long haul versus hub and spoke, different business models, and they couldn't compete. So the only way they could survive was to go through bankruptcy and rid themselves of the existing infrastructure. And then there are some that are pure technology plays that you would think should have been able to survive. Blockbuster, for example, a new technology company designed to rent videos with this new mechanism called videotape. You can go and rent it. Well, OK, along comes the internet, and what happens? Here comes Netflix, and whoa, there goes Blockbuster. Or take books. So when I was growing up, where'd you get books? You got books at your local corner bookstore. But then something happened, 20 years ago or so, and it was the rise of the megastore, the book superstore. And the book superstore, the Barnes & Nobles and the Borders of this world, the B. Daltons, put out of business the corner bookstore. Why? Because they were much better at attacking the long tail. You can go into a superstore and find 130,000 different titles there instead of the 10 or 15,000 you'd find at your local corner bookstore. And so you think, OK, this is the new world, so of course they're going to take over. Economies of scale and all that kind of stuff, franchise. But then something happened along the way. What happened? Oh, it's this thing called technology, and it's this thing called the internet. And what is it that completely killed Borders and B. Dalton and is doing significant damage at this point to Barnes & Noble? Oh, it's a little company designed by a guy named Jeff Bezos called Amazon. And so he looked at new technology and said, okay, they have these giant stores that you have to go to. They can only stock a certain number of titles in there. But you know what? Using the internet, using technology, I can have one giant warehouse sitting on top of the hub in Memphis, Tennessee for FedEx, and you can place your order over the internet through your computer, and I can ship the books to you overnight, and you can get many, many more books. So I'll have, instead of 130,000 titles in my warehouse, I'll have 2 or 3 million titles in my warehouse. So he did that, and that effectively killed the entire book industry. Okay, but then he said, and this is where his genius comes into play, because Jeff Bezos is one of the true role model geniuses of exponentially advancing technology. He said, okay, I've done this, I've killed these guys, now who is going to kill me if I don't move? Okay, well, the technology is going to keep advancing, and we're going to have this thing called digital stuff, digital books. You're not going to need this whole infrastructure that I've built up. So he said, okay, well, I got to kill myself before they kill me. And so he set out, he created the Kindle, he created a whole infrastructure to sell digital books online with the sole purpose of killing Amazon's existing business, which he had just started. And what was the result of all this? Well, what took Amazon 15 years to build a business, he managed to knock out in 2 years. It took 2 years for shipments of Kindle books to overcome Amazon's sales of all hardcovers and paperbacks combined. So what did he do as soon as he did this? Because he is a genius. He said, okay, well, who's going to kill my business, my digital business over here? Well, it'll be somebody else clearly in the digital kind of space, so I have to figure out how to get a piece of that action. So you know what? I'll take my entire back-end cloud, all these big servers and computers that are running my business, and I'll make them available to everybody else out there, but I'll charge them for the privilege, and I'll get my little piece of the action. And so now today, Amazon's Web Services is the biggest cloud provider out there, and all kinds of major companies that you know of are sitting there on top of his cloud. Okay, very, very interesting. Take a look at that graph over here. Take a look at how 2 years it took to get the Kindle to beat Amazon's entire infrastructure. So what you're seeing now is the pace of technological change has moved so fast that you can now start in a bedroom, basically, and within a very few years, create a really big company. And there are a couple of interesting cases of point that have been in the news recently, right? So these two companies, Uber and WhatsApp, both within 5 years of starting, were worth $18 billion. And WhatsApp has only 55 employees. 55 employees, 5 years, worth $18 billion over here. That's pretty amazing. All right, so how does this work? It's working because the cost, as you've heard from everybody today, has been dropping like a rock. It's been dropping exponentially. So let me give you some examples from my own personal life. As Celine mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an angel investor. So back in my first internet company, I started in 1991. To get started, it took us $20 million in venture capital financing to get to our internet product ship. A mere 6 or 7 years later, when I did my next company, well, technology had advanced so much that instead of having to have our own server farm in the office and stuff, we could now go out into the cloud, and it only took $2 million to get to our internet product ship. When I became an angel investor, my first angel investment deal, also in the wireless internet space, I did with Nicholas Negroponte, the co-founder of the MIT Media Lab, only took $200,000 to get to internet product ship. And then in 2007, a few years ago, as part of New York Angels, I led the investment round in a little online marketplace company. They came to us with a fully operating product, a website that was generating revenue. Their full management team of 3 people who had put in their sweat equity. They had invested a grand total of $20,000 to get to the shipment of their internet product. P.S., that company, which only took $20,000, is today worth $150 million. Very interesting, and that's only 7 years later. Now, you want to go out and start a company, you have an idea for an interesting app? Great, go ahead and get somebody to create your mobile app for you. You can now get a mobile app created by somebody in Brooklyn or Bangalore or Botswana for a couple of $1,000s. So if you take a look at those points on the chart, do they look familiar? They should look suspiciously familiar if you've been following along with what's been happening today. And the answer is, that is what? It's the power curve. Right? You were talking about the exponential power curve, the decreasing every time by a factor of half. So you're looking at doubling, 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 in this case, a tenth, a tenth, a tenth, a tenth, a tenth. Okay, that's pretty amazing. So now what does this mean? If you are trying to raise money to start a company today, where can you get money? When you're required 20 million bucks, there were not a lot of sources. You're not going to borrow from the bank, didn't get it from your parents, didn't have it in your pocket. You had to go to effectively VCs. And so that's why there were relatively few companies funded. It took a lot of money. But today, with this unbelievable change in technology, the low numbers that are required over here, you can raise this money from a whole lot of sources. And so let me give you a quick overview of all the places we see money as an angel investor, as an entrepreneur, we see money coming from today. All right, so to start from, you have, in this exponentially financial world, bootstrapping. You don't need money. You can get all this stuff for free. Cloud services are free. Open source software for free. You can get marketing for free. You can go online to search engines. You can build if you're at all technical and motivated, you can build your thing. You don't need any money at all. Okay, but what if you have an idea but you're not technical? Well, recruit a co-founder and pay them in equity, okay? Because it turns out that in this entrepreneurial world, this is now an accepted fact. So you can get a co-founder who is working for equity. But some businesses actually require real cash to play, and so the first place people usually go is friends and family. But the dollars are now within their budgets. We see a lot of people coming in with $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 having been raised from friends and family, and that's often enough to get you started. So from there, where do you go? You now have something starting in 2009 with Kickstarter. You have crowdfunding. This is project crowdfunding, creative crowdfunding, or pre-sale crowdfunding. So you have the ability to let your customers fund your company before they get their product. If they have faith and they like what you're doing, they can say, I'm going to bet on you, and I'm going to pay you my money now to buy this product after you get it done. Okay, that's pretty cool. You've seen some companies like Oculus Rift crowdfunded their first product, were sold for $1 billion. You can do it that way. Business plan competitions used to be pure academic things. So here's what I would do if I had a plan. That's now a misnomer. There are no plans. Plans don't win anything. You have business competitions. Every school these days has a business competition, and half the nonprofits have business competitions. And these aren't just for love or fame. In many cases, these are for checks. Most colleges now are giving $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. There was a business plan competition that I went to last week up north in New York State called 43 North. $5 million to the winning 5 companies. That's serious money to get this going. Okay, grants, free money from the government to spur entrepreneurship. $150,000 to start with, another $750 if you prove that you know what you're doing. And here's a secret. It's actually 10 times as easy to get a grant from the government as it is to get money from an angel investor. Literally, the hit rate is 25% for an SBIR grant, Small Business Innovation Research, and 2.5% from an angel investor. Well, compared to 0.2.5% from a venture capital investor. All right, you have a new thing called accelerators, started by Y Combinator about 7, 8 years ago by Paul Graham. Brings in teams, gives them enough stipends so they can live during the 3 months of the accelerator, helps to get their business model and plan all set, and then at the end introduces them to angel investors, and most of these companies get funded over there. All right, keep on going. How about strategic investors? I mean, if I told you the elephants are all dying, the mastodons are out of business, so all of these major companies are setting up their own corporate venture funds now to fund small companies because they can't innovate themselves. Keep going. You get individual angels. You have groups of individual angels. You have angel funds that are grouping together. And then when angels get really good and they get a lot of money, they become super angels, or they actually, which is a misnomer, they're really seed funds. They create their own fund and they get money from other people, and they can move fast and invest at early stages. You then have the whole question of online platforms. The next panel, you're going to hear some of the best platforms out there talking about how you can use the internet to introduce your company to investors, and investors can find companies out there. You have the idea of syndicates, where companies can post their profiles online, and an individual angel can say, hey, I'm leading this, and people can back that investor's choice of a company. You have traditional venture capital funds that are now trying to come downstream. They're torn. They've got to get big numbers on the board by going upstream, later stage, but all the exciting stuff is happening downstream in the early stage. First round capital, which did the initial seed round in Uber, has a 2,000x return on that particular investment. And then, of course, coming down the pike, you have Title III of the Jobs Act, which for the first time is going to provide the ability for non-accredited investors to invest in money. You'll hear about that from David Wield in the panel after this one, but that's going to be really challenging, but it's going to happen. And so what you're seeing here is this extraordinary democratization of capital. So I'll just leave you with one quick case study that we've done for several years at Singularity University in the finance track. And that is, imagine everything I've just told you about this whole finance world. You have all these early-stage startup companies founded by entrepreneurs. What percentage of the world is entrepreneurial? How about 1%? Let's take that, very conservative. What percent of the people in the world can invest? 52% of Americans own stocks, but let's say 1% globally. Let's say you get a population of 100 million people out there. So, okay, of 10 billion people. 1% of 10 billion is 100 million. You now have 100 million entrepreneurs and 100 million potential funders. An internet globalized, connecting everybody out there. Put all this together, and what could you do? Well, you can say when all this happens down the road, there'll be a hole in the market. And how could we solve it? And I'll show you what we did. You start with a company getting online to connect to all these various players. It can take its information and through an infrastructure and share it with an investor. It can also, if you had an ideal infrastructure, share it with an angel group. And the group itself can use this to go ahead and collaborate among different investors. And if they're all using this, it's not one-to-one, it's actually a many-to-many scenario. And because if everybody's in the same platform and you can connect the investors and the startup companies and the companies with each other, it becomes a collaboration platform. Add in the venture capital funds over here who have the same kinds of needs. Add in the accelerators and business plan competitions and all of the third parties in entrepreneurial support activities. Add in individuals like lawyers and accountants. Go ahead and add in the corporates who are now looking to provide strategic investing and ultimately M&A. Add in all of those folks who are out there in the high net worth individual world, family offices or investment advisors. And then you start doing that, and as a network play, the value of the network is equal to the square of the number of nodes. So the more people you have on this, the more players you have on it, the more valuable it becomes. And that is a global infrastructure for funding. And by the way, we had that vision, pre-Singularity U, 10 years ago, and that's what we founded. The company is called Gust, and today, Gust is this infrastructure platform globally that supports 250,000 companies, over 50,000 accredited investors. It's used by the national federations in the top 25 countries of the world, has processed over $1.8 billion of investment, and this is the infrastructure for this global future. And so with that, I will finish up just by saying, if you find the concept of this democratized capital interesting, and you're interested about angel investing, either to get it or to be it, I am delighted to say that you may all get a free copy of this wonderful New York Times bestselling book that just came out, Angel Investing. It's available outside, and if you see me after the session, I'd be happy to inscribe it for you. Thank you.